Multiple characters are back and fear is really starting to set in, so let's break down Season 6, Episode 12 of Teen Wolf right here on What Happened. How's it going, everyone? Lisa here, and welcome back to another Teen Wolf recap. Today it's all about the episode titled Raw Talent, which refers to something said by a character who returns that we see at the end of the episode. Now, I'm not going to give it away right now, but if you watch the episode, then you know exactly what I mean. Also, heads up, I unfortunately have to use only screen caps in my Teen Wolf recaps from now on. Seems like MTV is a stickler for claiming any bit of video footage, even if it's a tiny 10-second clip or a short clip of B-roll used for commentary and review purposes only. Cough, cough, it's fair use. So bear with me, guys. Alright, so in an episode that was kind of a bit slow and lacking in comedic moments, we get a lot of familiar faces, and our faves are finally figuring out that fear is what is connecting everything. I mean, I'm glad that they're figuring it out, and I hope that means that there's not going to be as many clusters of spiders in the future episodes freaking me out. Now, kicking off this recap, the first beautiful face to grace our TV screens in this episode is Theo. He is back, but sadly only for the first 5 minutes of this episode. So he's basically homeless since we last saw him, and he's living out of his truck, and it seems like he can't quite find the right place to park his truck and sleep peacefully because it's like Groundhog's Day with like hundreds of cops banging on his window, waking him up every day. During one of these instances, one of those pesky spiders crawls into his truck. Theo awakens one night and watches the spider just slowly crawl up his arm and his hand, and I know if that was me, I would have swatted that sucker in a millisecond. Well, unfortunately for Theo, that spider ends up biting him on the hand, and instead of turning into Spider-Man, the spider crawls under Theo's skin and starts moving around. By this time, Theo's actually made his way back to Beacon Hills and breaks into the animal clinic, grabs a scalpel, and in a move that Mr. Miyagi would be proud of, stabs the spider under his skin on the first try. And when he pulls it out to look at it, the spider turns into dust. Theo is then back in his truck debating whether or not to call Scott for help, and all of a sudden there's a tapping on his window, and no, it's not another cop telling him to move, it's a dude with a gun. It turns out it's actually a lot of dudes with a lot of guns. And then we see them shoot up Theo's truck. Now, it doesn't seem like Theo ever called Scott, but the way that Theo was holding his phone up along with his hands as the guys held their guns to him makes me think he was either filming what was going on his phone, or maybe he dialed Scott and left it recording as a voicemail that Scott's gonna listen to in the next episode. Well, the good thing is that we know that Theo isn't dead, as if you've watched the Super Tease for this season, you've seen him in other scenes that we haven't obviously seen yet. So the question is, who attacked him and how did he survive? Is it hunters? Let's move on to Lydia, who has to go back to a place I'm sure she wishes would just burn to the ground. Eichen House. While Scott and Malia head off to find Argent, Lydia goes off to investigate the noises she heard in her visions from the last episode. Parrish is doing his best to help her by playing various sounds for her to identify, but Lydia ends up figuring out on her own that the sounds are from Eichen House. Lydia wants to go there to investigate, but Parrish won't let her near that place, so he heads off alone. Now, Dr. Fenris, aka Tyler Posey's real-life dad, survived Halwyn's escape and is informing Parrish that it was apparently Halwyn who built Eichen House in 1912, and that he did it so that he'd always have a room there. He was to remain in a state of hibernation unless it got out. Eventually, down in the closed unit, Parrish hears voices and goes off to investigate while the doc runs off scared. Now, Parrish finds a whole room full of dead people, and the one lady who he heard calling out to him still alive next to this live wire. And she's also in a shower with water. Not a good sign. Now, she keeps saying, "It's here." Before she can say anything else, though, the doc shows back up, zaps Parrish with that wire, and locks him up in Halwyn's old cell, and turns on the gas to freeze him. The doc tells Parrish that they should be killing creatures like him to protect themselves, so he returns later with a gun and points it at Parrish's head with the plans to kill him because the doc says he can't be afraid anymore. Thankfully, Lydia shows up just in time to save the day. Next up, we have Mason and Liam and the return of Brett, plus that creepy guidance counselor whose name is apparently Monroe, which I think I missed in the last episode. So Mason seems to think that they must be looking for a mythical creature that is so powerful that the only safe place for it was the Wild Hunt, and if that's the case, they have a serious problem. Now, Liam was a little too worried about lacrosse to really care about what Mason is saying, and he says he has to get to practice because he and Brett are helping out the freshmen who think that they might have a chance at playing first line for varsity, which of course, only happens if you actually happen to have supernatural abilities. Now, I'd like to stop and take a moment here to share in Mason's appreciation of one of my favorite things, 8-packs. And that's how he describes Brett when he hears that he is returning to town. And while we don't get to actually see Brett's 8-pack at all in this episode, there's Google. Liam and Mason have run into Monroe in the hallway. She's trying to convince Liam to come into her office the next day for an appointment. He obviously doesn't want to, but she's like, we need to talk. And then she goes into her office and sees that there is a knife stuck in her desk, as well as a saying on the whiteboard, which Mason sees and identifies as a Sun Tzu quote. And then Monroe kicks him out of her office and she looks scared. Practice doesn't really go so well for Liam, as Brett basically is kicking his ass and Liam is eventually getting angrier and angrier. Liam eventually scores a goal on Corey that is thrown so hard the ball burns through the net and lands in the parking lot, conveniently next to the guidance counselor's car. When she picks it up and looks at the field, she only sees that Brett is practicing and he becomes her next target. Meanwhile, Liam takes his aggression out on his poor locker, and when Mason and Corey come to find him later to get him to go study for their history test, Mason sees some blood behind them on the locker room floor. Now, earlier in the episode, we saw a freshman, I believe they said was named Aaron, put on his helmet, which ended up being full of those spiders, and you guessed it, they crawled into his mouth and did bad things. Now, Mason and Liam and Corey follow the trail of blood and clothes and equipment throughout the locker room to the showers, where they see a mutilated body on the floor. So they run around the school trying to figure out where Aaron is. Now, he's the only kid that's not accounted for, and they end up finding him in the history classroom sitting at his desk studying, saying that he forgot he had a history test the next day. So wait a second. If he's sitting there, but he was attacked by spiders, then what's the mutilated body in the shower? Is this some kind of body snatching something or other? So are these spiders creating maybe hunters? Meanwhile, poor Brett has to deal with Monroe, who finds him in the parking lot and gushes to him about his lacrosse skills. She then throws the lacrosse ball back to him, and surprise, it's full of wolfsbane. Monroe tells Brett that he doesn't deserve to have this much power and terrify people, so she stabs him with his broken lacrosse stick and then hits him across the head. Now, when she sees that his head heals within seconds, she says that's incredible and no one should be able to do that. And then she pulls out a knife. Now, Brett manages to claw the bitch's neck and runs off into the woods. She follows him there, and Brett manages to get her from behind and attack her. She drops her knife. Now, for a moment, I had a glimmer of hope that Brett would finish her off, but that's not the case. Out of nowhere, he gets shot with an arrow and runs off. So who saved Monroe's ass? Probably one of the last people we really wanted to show back up in town. Gerard. Gerard then tells Monroe he recognizes raw talent when he sees it, and it seems like someone he is going to recruit. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell Monroe's purpose is and why this new hunter is indeed in town. Speaking of so-called new hunters, let's talk about the last storyline in this episode that involves Scott, Malia, and Argent, and the discovery that new hunters are indeed in town. Now, Scott, Malia, and Lydia are in the woods after finding the bullet with a fleur-de-lis on it. Now, Scott seems to be having visions and flashbacks to when he was being hunted by the Argents, and this is actually a clip that was released a while ago to promote this final season. As they continue their stroll through the woods, they come up on a bunch of people with guns and what seems like laser sights in the woods, and because of his visions, Scott assumes these people to be hunters, and he wolfs out and attacks one, who actually is Sheriff Stilinski, and it's just the cops coming to check on the dead body of Howland in the woods. Scott, Malia, and Lydia keep their information about the bullet they found to themselves, and then Scott and Malia head to Argent's bunker to try to find him. There they find crates of guns and realize that Argent must be back in business. Now, Malia thinks that she is a hacker now and attempts to hack Argent's computer and is guessing passwords like gun, lots of guns, and hunter, which obviously do not work, but provides one of the more comical moments in this episode, which there are few of, besides Mason. Eventually, Scott finds Allison's bow, and it's like, oh, ding, Allison's the password, we should have tried that first. Argent is, in fact, in the middle of an arms deal, but it seems like he's maybe been duped. The people he thought he was selling to are not the people he is selling to, so he demands to know who the buyer is. The guy in charge refuses to tell Argent who is buying the weaponry, and just as Argent is about to have his guy on the inside back him up and take these guys out, Scott and Malia show up and just so happen to take out that one inside guy out of all the guys they could have picked. So now these two are Argent's backup, and a gun battle ensues, and we get to see Argent do one of those badass two-gun slow-mo shots. That's like standard in any kind of badass action movie. They finally get rid of everyone but the main guy and demand to know who the guns are for again, but he manages to drop a grenade and drive off in his SUV. Now Argent explains to Scott and Malia that he hasn't been avoiding them, his business is booming, and he's trying to figure out why. Malia then brings up the bullet with the fleur-de-lis, and Argent insists that he hasn't stamped a bullet since Allison died. They inform him that a hellhound was killed with that bullet, and when Scott goes to show the bullet to Argent, well, it's no longer in his pocket. Seems like it is lost on the floor with 100 shells from that gunfight. Thankfully, Argent tells them that it's okay, they just need to find the slug, so Scott and Malia head back into the woods, and we get the first bit of romantic music playing under their bonding, which means it's flirting, and there's totally romance coming up in the future. Now Malia asks Scott what he was freaking out about in the woods earlier, and they sort of bond over both being hunted, and Scott asks if that fear ever goes away. At that moment, Malia sees a red laser sight behind Scott, and for a second they both have kind of that hunter fear again. Thankfully, it's only Argent who's just trying to track the trajectory of the bullet, and he finds the slug in a tree, and the bullet is indeed made of silver. So what's up with the silver bullet? Well, Malia asks that same question, and they explain to her it's a myth that a silver bullet can kill a werewolf. And Argent says real hunters would know it's a myth, so whoever did this is very dangerous. And why are they dangerous? Because they are a new hunter. So this confirms that Monroe is definitely some kind of new hunter, probably not alone, and now that Gerard has a hold of her, who knows what she's going to be capable of. Later we see Scott, Malia, and Lydia together again, and Lydia is explaining to them what she saw at the Eichen house and how the doc killed everyone that was supernatural in the closed unit because he was afraid and he couldn't see it any other way. Now this sets off the light bulb in Scott's brain, and he realizes that the wolves, the rats, everything keeps going back to that word, fear. And when Malia asks what everyone is afraid of, Scott says, us. Fear can indeed do crazy things and can make people do things you wouldn't believe. So this whole fear thing, we've obviously seen, Scott's kind of fear of hunters has been brought back up, but he hasn't been bit by anything. So this fear must be being controlled by whatever was released, right? That it's here. That thing also has to be controlling these spiders, right? And the rats. Now, I'm not gonna lie, at this moment, I still can't come up with any good theories as to what the hell is going on this show right now. But that's why I like doing these recaps and hearing what you all have to say down in the comments, because you are the ones who end up picking up on things that I would not pick up on, and you have such good theories. And so if you have any, please leave them down in the comments below. I need some clarity on what the hell is going on. What kind of creature are we looking for? Why is Halloween the Hellhound been released? This thing has to be bad, that it's bringing literally everyone, including these hunters, back to town. Alright, now hit me up in the comments below with your theories or on my social media. Let's talk about this fear thing and the it that has been released. Who do you also think shot Theo, and what's with Gerard and this army and these new hunters? What exactly are they trying to accomplish? After that, you can click right over here for details on Once Upon a Time or Riverdale, and if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, because I'll be here recapping Teen Wolf every week, trying to figure out what is going on as the show comes to a close. I am Lisa. As always, thanks for watching and sticking it out with me.